Hey, what's up, DIYers? Mike Borders with the Mike Borders channel. Thank you for watching. Back working on my parents' 2003 Sea-Doo GTX. In today's video, part 3 of the install process of the 951 DI or direct injection engine. Let's continue the project. DIYers, here we are at the workstation and my mom and dad's 2003 Sea-Doo GTX. And again, this is part 3 of the engine install process. And if you have been with us for part 1 and part 2, hey, glad to have you. Let's get this thing wrapped up. However, if not, definitely check out the link scrolling above as well as down below in the comments and description, and we will have part 1 and part 2. It will bring you up to speed with where we're at right now. However, let's get right back to it. And coming closer inside the jet ski hull, let's take a look. Here is our overhauled engine, repainted and all. And in part 2, we did a lot. We hooked up a lot of lines and hoses, and the throttle body, and more. However, again, we're picking up right where we left off. We are now going to start part 3 with installing the exhaust pipe, and it's going to go there. We will need to get our brand new gasket, and it's going to feed upstream and loop around the front portion of the engine and make its way underneath the starboard side and connect to the orange coupler down below. Coming outside of the jet ski and underneath, here is our exhaust pipe that I just went and grabbed, and I am going to remove all of the hardware as well as the brace or mount. And we've got several. DIYers, to the workbench. On the left hand side we have our gasket that will go in between the top portion of the exhaust and the exhaust manifold. To the right of that we've got 3 6mm bolts that will secure this brace or mount on the front portion of the engine. 17mm bolt that goes through bushings and has a washer. And I've taken the tape off of that, and we are going to use Loctite 243 on the thread of each of these 3 bolts. Not anything but Loctite 243. As shown here. Loctite 243, and it is blue. And down below in the comment section as well as the description section will be a link on where to purchase this. And it is very runny. Do your best not to make a mess. You just want to apply as shown here. And I'll do this for all 3. From here we'll head back inside the jet ski hull and secure this brace with the 3 bolts. Back inside the hull, looking at the front portion of the engine, and here are the threaded inserts on the top portion of the engine block. And the mount or brace itself only goes on one way. Just match the bolt holes of the brace to the thread on the engine and secure all 6mm bolts. Do not cross thread these bolts. That would be terrible. And DIYers, our serial number service manual calls for 18 foot-pounds on each of these bolts. There's one. I'll go down to the bottom one. Now to the third one. Now to a top view, and again all 3 bolts are torqued to 18 foot-pounds, and that brace or mount is secured to the engine. We are now going to direct our attention more port side to the exhaust manifold, and you've got this little nut here. It is a 15mm, and just back it out until the nut is flush with the bolt head. You don't actually have to remove it. In fact, you definitely do not want to remove it. From here, we will go grab the gasket and press it into place inside the manifold. Back to the workbench, and I was given a brand new gasket from the overhaul shop. However, I had an extra OEM one. I'm going to use that. Here it is unpackaged, and the OEM one is black. Back inside the hull and looking at the exhaust manifold, and something very important to point out, you have a very unique shape to the machine cut that the gasket goes in at the lower left-hand corner. And that is different than all the remaining three. And because of that, you want to make sure you install the gasket the right way. As you can see, these are more rounded, and this has a rounded and dip to it. And just place it inside the little gap. And go slow. Don't rush it. Don't damage your gasket. As shown there. And from here, I'm going to raise the camera up and feed downstream to the orange coupler. Again, ensure that your clamp is loose and pushed fully aft to allow the exhaust pipe to slide into that coupler with ease. And coming out of the hull, just double check everything and make sure everything is in its proper position so we can lower the exhaust pipe into place. Back to the exhaust pipe, and we do have additional hardware. We are going to remove all of these Allen bolts here, 3 total. We're going to remove that bolt and that bolt right there. And DIYers, there it is. The hardware has been removed. It is now time to pick up the pipe and ever so carefully lower it inside the hull and position it in place. Back to the jet ski, camera is positioned on the aft portion of the hull looking forward. And before moving on, I actually removed the tape that I had applied to the starboard side engine brace or mount to keep those bushings in place. And I'll just double check that the bushings are properly pressed together, which they are. And I am going to keep this large water hose connected to the engine block, which will ultimately continue to hold this direct injection distributor up and away from where I'm going to slide that pipe. Back to the front, ensure the bushings are in place. The nut is backed out, the gasket is installed, and the last thing, I will pull the paper towel out. And DIYers, the pipe is heavy, come in with a U shape, as shown here, and carefully lower it in place. And I'm going to lower this portion first. I'm going to push this back. I'm also working down below with the coupler to ensure that that side of the exhaust goes inside that coupler. Back port side, looking at the exhaust pipe and the brace, and I've got the 17mm bolt and washer. I'm going to slide that through carefully and hold the bushing in place so it doesn't fall. And I am going to simultaneously pull up on the exhaust pipe and hand tighten this in place without cross-threading it. I might need to hop to starboard side. Here we are starboard side and making progress. What I've done was basically place the 3 bolts as shown here and just hand tighten them. And I have not got that one to align yet. I'm going to come down in here, and right there is the starboard side mount. And you can see when I move the exhaust pipe, right like that, I'm going to align that in place and secure that bolt. However, first I have to remove that water line. Now to an update, I did just that. It's not a water line, it's a water hose. There's the fitting right there, and the hose is right there. And now I'm going to align the exhaust pipe with the bushings and hole and secure that bolt. And I've got a ratchet and socket and extension on that bolt. And do not tighten anything yet. You want to keep everything loose until everything is aligned and the bolts are threaded in without being cross-thread. At that point, just carefully tighten all the hardware. And DIYers, in the event that you do not have a ratchet style wrench, check out the link down below in the comment section and description. These are awesome. Check that out. A ratchet style wrench. And I've got that 17mm bolt aligned and I'm securing it just shy of tight. Back to these bolts. And it seems like I'm using different tools as I work through the project. Check that out. Back port side, we have a 13mm bolt that needs to go inside this brace here that comes up from the throttle body and secures into the bushing. And you just need to carefully pull up on the throttle body. At this point, everything is hand tight. Just go all the way around the entire exhaust pipe as well as manifold and ensure everything is properly secured and positioned properly and nothing is being pinched. I've got my lines and hoses away down below where the water hose is going to secure to the lower fitting. That is not obstructed or pinched, as well as anything back here. The distributor, I can pull up. I've got access to the hose that secures onto that fitting that we just pulled off. Again, a water hose, and nothing is being pinched. In addition, ensure that your exhaust pipe is pushed all the way onto your coupler, and that will be the very last thing we tighten. Back starboard side, looking port side to the exhaust pipe feeding into the exhaust manifold, and the 3 8mm bolts and that 15mm bolt down below. Don't forget about that. And what you want to do to properly seat the rubber gasket is tighten these in sequence. And what I mean by that is get them all hand tight first, as well as that 15mm nut on the bottom, and then come up top and tighten this just a little bit, maybe 3 turns. Go down below, 3 to 5 turns. Go all the way up top, 3 to 5 turns. Go back down below and continue this sequence so you properly secure this exhaust onto the manifold and evenly pressing that gasket in place to create that watertight seal. Back port side, and we have secured all 3 of our 8mm bolts into the exhaust pipe and manifold and tightened them in sequence and torqued them to 30 foot-pounds per our exact manual. We have also secured the lower 15mm nut, the 17mm bolt that secures the brace at that location, as well as the 8mm down below right there. And last but not least, the 13mm bolt that secures the throttle body brace here, or plate, to the bushing. And before we start securing anything to the exhaust pipe, we are going down below to the orange coupler. And we are going to loosen up that clamp so we can slide it forward and onto the portion of the exhaust pipe that has entered inside the coupler and secure that clamp. Down inside the hull looking at the coupler, and when you secure and tighten this clamp in place, make sure it is on the inner portion of the actual bevel lip on the exhaust pipe that slid into the coupler. And right here you can see I can push in on the pipe, but right there I cannot. I can push in right there, I can't right here. In addition, you want about 1/4 inch of coupler on the other side and just carefully tighten it. Do not over tighten it. Coming up on the top portion of the engine and to starboard side, I am now going inside here, and that hose we removed from that fitting right there, I am now going to resecure and tighten with that clamp right there. And just like everything else, do not damage anything as you tighten this in place. And do not over tighten it. And as you tighten it, ensure that the hose is pushed all the way flush and mating with the engine. Coming back up top, moving forward to the top portion of the exhaust, we are now going to resecure the hose and line, as well as come port side to the exhaust fitting here and resecure the line that we labeled or color-coded blue in the beginning of our project. Another quick reposition of the camera. I'll start with this one that we color-coded orange. That goes to this fitting right here. Push that all the way on and flush and use a zip tie to secure it. However, before that, I'll come to the water hose and secure that. Again, flush on the ribbed fitting and zip tie. followed by snipping the excess portion of the zip tie away. Camera is now starboard side, looking port side where we are, and again we color coded this blue in the early stages of the project and just carefully feed it onto the fitting all the way flush as shown there, and zip tie it in place. And DIYers, as you are tightening these zip ties, do not be overly aggressive because the last thing you want to do is damage the fittings. Next, we are going to direct our attention below the exhaust and front portion of the engine where we've got that water hose that needs to be secured to the bottom portion of the exhaust. Back port side coming inside the front portion. And again, there is the fitting and there is the hose. We are going to place that hose on the fitting ever so carefully. And again, ensure nothing pinches it. And we are going to carefully tighten that clamp. Now to an update and a close-up, we have secured that hose on the fitting and tightened it in place with the clamp. Again, do not over tighten it and make sure the hose itself is all the way pushed on flush with the bottom portion of the exhaust where no fitting is showing. Back up top, and here is the exhaust pipe, and there's that exhaust mount with the 17mm bolt, and I feel comfortable now bringing the zip tie all the way into the bottom corner of the brace and through the hole, and I'm going to zip tie that electrical wiring in place. And when doing this, do not over tighten it. And I'll cut the excess away. And it did just that. I have cut away that zip tie. Again, not too tight. From here, I am going to remove the green, orange, and blue electrical tape. And then we are going to begin prepping the water temp sensor and installing that, as well as getting the air injectors and fuel injection rail and distributor resecured to the top portion of the engine. Green, orange, and blue tape removed from the lines. Again, we color-coded to stay organized, and there's only one color-coded line left, and that is the white one, and that will actually secure down on the air pump on that fitting right there. And then we've got our hose that feeds out of the distributor, and that will go inside right here and be secured by that screw. And then we've got this hose right here that will actually go on the fitting back in there, right there. However, first again, time to install the water temp sensor and fuel rail. Back to the workbench, and there is our water temp sensor, and it's just a few months old. Here is the old ones, and down below in the comments and description will be a link on where to purchase that OEM part number. Quite a difference. And we need to apply Loctite 518, not Loctite 243, or as I mentioned before, 271, not even 680. 518. Camera set back, and again, Loctite 518, this is red. And just like everything else, do not make a mess, just apply a thin bead of Loctite 518, as shown here. And I'll basically just spread it around the thread. And from here, I'll just basically kind of evenly spread it in the thread. Let's head back to the hull and install it. Back inside the hull, and again, here is the threaded insert on the starboard side of the engine that the water temp sensor will be threaded into and secured into. And very important, we actually have to carefully lift up the distributor and bring it on the forward portion of where that temp sensor will be positioned, because if we install that temp sensor with the distributor way down here, it will be impossible to lift it up and over the sensor. So keep that in mind. And I'm doing my best to give you a good view of this. Try not to cross thread it. And it should go in extremely easily. And we are going to grab a 3/4 inch wrench and secure it. And from here on the very back side, you have an electrical connection point, and this is what it looks like right there. The orange one, not this one. This one is for your air injector, and you will carefully re-secure this connection point to the top portion of the sensor. Taking a step back, I am actually going to remove both of my spark plugs, and that is going to give us better access to the air injector cavities where they will be inserted. Do not drop these in the hole. And from here, the top holes here and here are for the spark plugs, and the bottom holes there and there are for our air injectors. Back to the workbench, grabbing both of our air injectors, and we are going to install these in the engine block as opposed to the bottom portion of the distributor. And once they're installed, we will then lower the distributor onto the top portion of the injectors. And DIYers, if you joined us during the removal process of the 951 Di engine, in part 3, we removed both of these injectors from the top portion of the engine and immediately placed caps on the bottom portion of the injectors that feed inside the engine. And the reason being is because there is an O-ring, and more importantly, there is what is called a carbon dam, and it's basically a carbon seal. And you also notice that we removed these from the engine block very carefully to alleviate harm to those carbon dams. And in our case, our injectors are only just a couple months old. They're not 20 years old like the ones we replaced not long ago. So we are going to reuse these, and that's where those little caps play a huge role, because what that does is it alleviates the possibility of your carbon dam expanding, because if that happens, they will be impossible to reinsert and slide into the cavity of the engine. You can give it some friendly force. However, again, if those carbon dams have expanded, you will damage them as you insert them and push them into that cavity. In addition, we've got a rubber O-ring, and all I'm going to do is carefully remove the cap. And I might actually take the O-ring off too. Close up, just popping the O-ring. I'll set that aside. And again, under here is a carbon dam and an O-ring. I'm just going to grab here and remove it. Just like that. And you don't have much time, just a few minutes. We do not want that white carbon dam to expand. I'll set that aside. Do the same thing for here. Remove the O-ring. Remove the cap. And I'm going to use injection oil to lubricate the carbon dams and O-ring. And do your best not to get any on the bottom tip where that little hole is. In addition, I'm going to lubricate the O-rings with injection oil. Let's head back and get these installed inside the engine. Back inside the hull, I'm going to carefully lower the O-rings inside here and apply just some friendly pressure to seat them. Followed by inserting the air injectors and the electrical connection point feeding to the starboard side of the engine, and align them straight and carefully press them in place. And do your absolute best to press these down slowly and as straight and in line with that cavity bore as possible. I will use that same injection oil to lubricate the top O-rings on each of the injectors. And wipe my hands clean. Carefully grab the rail, and on the bottom portion you have holes here, and carefully align the distributor over the injectors and press it down in an even and straight manner, as shown there. And from here we need to actually apply Loctite 243 to the retaining bolts that secure the distributor onto the block. Back to the workbench, and again, Loctite 243, not anything else. Loctite 243 per our service manual for the retaining bolts that secure the distributor onto the engine. I'll set this aside. And this is a little runny compared to the Loctite 518. 518 is more of a paste, but this is very liquidy. And I'll do the same thing for the other one. Back inside the hull and on the inner portion of each injector and the regulator are the holes for the bolts, and these are 13 millimeters. And do not cross thread these. They should go in extremely easy by hand. And from here, our serial number service manual calls for these bolts to be properly torqued to 18 foot-pounds. And all I'm doing now is just tightening the bolts with the torque wrench. However, just to a point where it has tension, and then I'll hop to the other side, which is right there, so we can properly torque these in sequence. And I'm going to torque the right side first, or aft portion, and again, 18 foot-pounds. There we go. Now to the front. Sorry, I accidentally bumped the camera. There we go. From here, just double check everything and make sure that the air injectors are properly seated and installed. Everything looks good, and the back electrical connection to the water temp sensor is secured. And if all looks good, we are now going to re-secure the electrical connections on the top portion of our fuel injectors. Make sure that the connections are firmly secured and locked, and these little tension clips are extended out. In other words, if I extend them or push them in, that is what allows them to be unlocked and be taken off. Taking a step back, I'm going to carefully insert and thread in our spark plugs. I am not going to secure the spark plug wires and boots to the top portion of the plugs. That will come a little bit later. And again, do not cross thread these. These should go in extremely easy as shown here. In our case, a 5/8 socket, and it needs to be a deep socket, and we will tighten those in place. Do not over tighten these either. Coming inside this little section of the engine and to the rear portion of our fuel distributor, and I do want to show you the back portion of the air injector as well as its respective electrical connection. And as you can see, it has a blue rubber seal. Go ahead and carefully align the electrical connection and secure it back on the air injector. And do that for both. And coming back inside that little section and to the connection point, just ensure that the connection is pressed all the way on and locked in place as shown here. And again, do that for this air injector as well as the right side. If all looks good, we are going to now transition to the aft starboard side where the air pump or piston is. And we've got this white color-coded line as well as this hose here. And we've got this air line coming off the fuel distributor, and it has an O-ring. We are going to replace that O-ring. Back to the workbench, and here is our OEM replacement O-ring. There's the part number right there. Back inside the hull and facing the aft portion of the jet ski, and here is our large air box, and the bottom pipe coming out of it feeds into the opposite end of that orange coupler. And again, we are going to carefully remove the O-ring on the air hose here, and as you do that, do not put any pressure up top on the opposite end. And I've got a little pick tool. I'm going to just carefully remove the O-ring. There it is. And using that exact same injection oil, I'm going to lubricate the new O-ring, and here's the new one. And I'm going to carefully press it onto the groove, as shown here. And I'll apply a little bit more of that injection oil to lubricate that O-ring. Now let's go to the app portion, and inside the hull, let's direct our attention to the air pump or air piston, and we've got 3 fittings that need to be secured. We've got 2 high pressure fittings, which are this one and this connection right here on the very top, and then you've got a low pressure fitting. In DIYers, it's extremely important. Any high pressure fitting and hose will require an Oetiker clamp. However, all low pressure fittings only require a zip tie. So during the removal process, any hose or line that has a clamp like that, consider it high pressure. And because of that, you will want to ensure that you reinstall that line and secure it with a high pressure Oetiker clamp as opposed to just a zip tie. Back to the workbench, and I do want to show you the size comparisons between a few clamps. And the far left clamp, that is the size that we installed on the aft portion of the rubber boot that's installed on the PTO. And then the center clamp, that is the clamp we are going to use on the air hose. And the far right clamp is the one you just saw that we used to install those lines on the rave valve housings. Camera is now positioned in a way we are looking at the air pump, and again, that fitting right there, that's a high pressure fitting, as well as the fitting right inside here, and this is the low pressure fitting. And here's the hose, and I'm going to carefully insert the clamp and feed that up. And I'm going to feed this hose onto the fitting and push it all the way on that ribbed fitting until the hose itself is flush with the base here. As shown there, I'll allow the clamp to fall. I'll grab that tool to compress that clamp in place on that fitting. And I've got a hold of the clamp with the tool, and I will lower the clamp on until it's basically dead center on the fitting, and I will compress it. As shown there, and that is on there. I will now carefully remove the 10mm nut, and do your best not to drop this. I'm now going to lower the air hose and position the little lock plate here and align the fitting in as well as the plate on the threaded stud, and you will push them down simultaneously. As shown there, return the nut and I will hand tighten it, followed by using just a standard 1/4" ratchet and socket to tighten it. Back to the workbench, and we are now going to use our inch-pound torque wrench. And here it is opened up, and again, this is our inch-pound torque wrench, and down below in the comments and description will be a link on where to purchase this. This is important during this project. Followed by using our inch-pound torque wrench to torque it. There we go. Now return the low pressure line that I color coded with the white tape. Push that all the way on as shown there and secure it with just a standard zip tie. And I'll remove that white tape. Coming back up top, we are going to now transition back port side and install our air box to our throttle body. Back to the workbench, and feeding off to the left there is the air box and both of our intakes. And I wiped them down, kind of cleaned them up just a little bit. However, important, do not get any water inside the box. We are going to remove that clip first. Back to the jet ski and lowering the air box to the lower port side, and we are going to carefully maneuver and move any lines as you shift this down and into place. And these holes or circular cutouts in the airbox will actually loop on to the throttle body. And the O-rings installed will give it that airtight seal. And again, do your absolute best not to pinch any hoses or wiring or anything in the process. And feed it right up on. And ensure that the lock clip is out of the way to give you the clearance. And then lock it in place. Coming into the top portion of the airbox, and I do want to show you the latch as well as the securing or lock clip. Just ensure that it is installed properly as shown here. Back to the aft top portion of the hull, looking forward to the engine. It is now time to install our rubber guards here and install them properly. And this little part right here will be on the bottom of the angle down or bent down plate. Now I like to install that first, as shown there, followed by this side. Same thing with the front. Followed by reinserting both our aft and forward air ducts and slide them into place inside the airbox until the top portion or bushing is lined up with that hole. And I'll do that for this side. As shown there, followed by the 10mm bolt and washer and nut. And I'll grab my 10mm wrench and 10mm ratchet and socket. And do not over tighten these, but you do want them snug. Same thing to the front. And I'll just position these as shown. Now to a close-up view in DIYers, just ensure you install and place those properly as shown here. And next, you can actually grab your PTO shroud or cover and reinsert it in the back portion of this plate and secure it with those plastic wing nuts. And before you do that, just ensure that you bring up your spark plug wires and boots so you don't get them pinched underneath that shroud. Back to the top aft portion of the jet ski, and here's our shroud. I did my best to clean it up. And again, you have this little tab right here, and that will go on the inner or underside of this plate and pop out the top. As shown there. And each wing nut has a washer. You are screwing plastic thread into aluminum thread. Do not cross thread these. And do not over tighten them either. And don't drop them. Back to the top, we are now going to carefully install our spark plug boots on their respective plugs and align them properly and carefully push down in an even straight manner until it makes a clicking noise. Like that. And let me move the camera to this side, and you've got these little machine cutouts in the engine, and you can place your spark plugs in there. And give each boot just a little bit of slack so it's not real tight, as shown there. Maybe a little more on this side. And then down here, the wires themselves are not resting on any portions of the engine, and there is not too much tension down here. And taking a step back, and DIYers at this point, I recommend maybe taking 5 minutes and double checking everything to ensure everything is re-secured. Because what we are going to do next is reinstall the duct and the seat brace as well as the center top portion of that brace. Back looking inside the hull, and we are going to ever so carefully lower this large duct into place, and this portion right here actually has to go underneath either side of the hull and basically in line with this little beveled out portion. And it's going to grab a hold of the bottom or inner side, and then that top brace, as you remember in part 1, will secure into this and lock this in place with those 4 10mm bolts. And there is a little cutout I want to show you just on this side of this hull. As it rounds the rear corner and makes its way forward, there is a little indent, so place the center brace accordingly. And I'm going to place the bolts in here and ever so carefully align the bottom holes with the bolts and secure all 4. And there it is. Again, do not over tighten those, and that duct is placed again where it's not harming or pinching or crimping any wiring or any hoses. And if all looks good, we are going to remove that paper towel and resecure our battery. Battery is reinstalled into our jet ski, and again, all we have to do to restore power now is turn that switch to the on position. And another 5 minutes or so, just double checking everything, looking over all of your connections. And if all looks good, we are going to pull the jet ski out and basically start the engine and break it in. Alright DIYers, taking a step back, and that is it. We hope this helps. Our goal here at the DIY channel is to get you the info you need without wasting your valuable time, and hopefully your time was not wasted during this video. And from here, whether you went the SBT route or a local shop overhauled your engine, we recommend again following your serial number service manual and talking to the shop or talking to SBT and verifying the proper break-in for the engine that you had overhauled. Yours might be different than ours, so again, if you went the SBT route, talk to them. It's likely that they have step-by-step guidance on how to break in their overhauled engines, or if you went with a local Sea-Doo shop or overhaul shop, they may have their own special guidance on how to properly break in the engine that they overhauled. So again, ask the questions to ensure that you are breaking your overhauled engine in properly. And again, that is it. We are going to allow the jet ski to sit as is and stationary for about 48 hours, and then we are going to pull it out and go through the proper break-in procedures. And believe it or not, we have already got our next project in line. So when this jet ski rolls out, we've got a 95 XP rolling in, and we'll show you that now. Alright DIYers, we are back in the garage, and in part 1 we did show you this. Again, this is my wife's 1995 Sea-Doo XP, and we are excited. We are going to pull that 2003 Sea-Doo GTX out of the house, and we are going to roll this one in and again get started on additional DIY videos for all of you, the DIY community. And again, as always, we hope this helps. Do us a favor, below the video you'll see that thumbs up icon. Click on that, like the video, subscribe to the channel. Definitely ring your YouTube bell. That would be very helpful to us. We'd really appreciate it. Thanks again for watching.